Here we are, episode 2 of Everything She Knows. Guys, thank you so much for your patience on this wild ride while we get it right. It's going to take us a little bit. We're going to get into the groove. So last week I was here with Marco Rogers and we learned a lot. We only really got to scratch the surface of his journey, but we learned a lot on this setup. So hopefully today we're going to be looking at some goodness that's going to be happening. All goodness, all video, all the time. And no audio issues, hopefully. So anyway, but the other thing that I realized after doing the first episode with Marco was it kind of ended up being like an interview. And I'm like, interviews are great. I know a lot of really cool people, but I want to kind of like tell the stories and the experiences through discussion of a topic. And I feel like I didn't really deliver on that last time. So I'm going to try to do a better job with that this week. This week we're talking about what's wrong with capitalism. And by the way, Marco will be joining us again on the 25th. And we're still deciding what we might talk about, but I'm thinking it's probably going to be framed around relationships, love, marriage, kids, that type of thing. But today I'm here with the inimitable Deldelp Medina, and I'm going to say this really clearly because everyone always mess up this woman's name. It's Deldelp Medina. It's spelled Deldelp, but the P is silent. So she is a collaborator, a thought partner of mine. She is an advisor, a strategist, a coach for Black and Brown founders, and she is also currently on the market, folks. But she's a curious nerd.
I am.
She is one of the most observant people that I know. She's a Silicon Valley veteran, was really raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is a rarity. So many of us are like transient transplants who come in and out. She's been doing D&I work for over a decade. She's the founder of the first Latina accelerator for women in the mobile space. She is the former president of the Latino Startup Alliance, and she is the former director of the entrepreneurship residency at Code 2040, which is how we first met and really changed the whole trajectory of my whole thing, which we'll maybe talk about at some point in the near future. But today, we're talking about capitalism. Oh, and you can follow her online at Deldelp, which like Deldelp is her.
Yep.
Welcome, Del.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm great. What an introduction. Thank you so much. I don't think I've ever had somebody explain my name as often as you have for other people, because usually I'm the one that has to be like, this is how you pronounce my name. And I know Aniyia is also a name that a lot of people sometimes don't get right.
I get Aniyia all the time.
Yeah, or other names, as I was mentioning to you recently. I was talking to somebody and they were talking and I was like, who is she talking about? And then I realized they were talking about you, but they had mispronounced your name and I didn't understand that they were talking about you. And it took me like a second to be like, oh, you're mispronouncing Aniyya's name.
Yes, this is me, Aniyia. So Deldelp, the P is silent.
Yes.
Aniyia, like Anita without the T, and spelled in a really crazy way.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to talk about capitalism. I feel like we should warm up by just sharing some of our beliefs. Like, let's set the scene. So I want to try to give a little bit of context just about how we're going to like think about this show going into the future and today for our discussion, which is really like to be able to create an environment where we can kind of start to engage with conversations about things that we think are important. I think that there's a lot to be said about what's going on in the world and how everything is just kind of fucked, like we're going to hell in a handbasket currently. And we'd very much like to reverse that course if possible. But in order to do that, we have to start to talk to each other. We have to start having discussion. We have to start creating these spaces where people can come in and have honest and authentic discussion about topics so we can decide what is the world that we're trying to build and how do we want to go about building that world together. Yeah. So I'm hoping that we can start to get some of these things out in the air. And if you're watching this after the fact and you're not joining us live, Feel free to use the hashtag everything she knows. I know that that's a lot of characters right now. Maybe we need to come up with a ESK or whatever. I don't know, @mention me, whatever. So that we can also continue this discussion on Twitter. Del and I are on Twitter all the time.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you said that because well, this is a very heady, big subject. It's very clear to me that we are not the only ones that can come up with these solutions. To me, this is a conversation so that everybody can engage. So yes, follow us on Twitter. Yes, mention on Twitter. Have conversations with other people out there. I think the idea that only a select group of people gets to decide what our financial futures look like is ridiculous, and that not even if you have a PhD in economics or anything else like that, you're not the only one with the solutions. The solutions have to be co-created because so often they haven't been, and so as a result, we've been bearing the cost of them on many different levels, and so it's important for us to engage in this conversation. I know some people are going to be putting things up on the chat, but I think this is a conversation that should go forward.
Absolutely.
And the things that we're going to mention and talk about aren't the be-all, end-all of it all. Rather, to me, it's like dipping your toes into the waters so that you can start to have these conversations. Because I think 2020, electoral politics or not, regardless of where you are in the world, the reality is that these are conversations that we all need to be having around our dinner tables and, in our churches and synagogues and mosques. We need to be having this conversation with our next door neighbors, because at this moment in time, while we're living in a particular place and time that you're living in, we also have to start reimagining a future. Climate change is real, and the way the current economy is working is no longer going to be viable. And I think that anxiety is not one to be dismissed. Rather, it's to be engaged in a conversation so that we can actually do something about it.
Word. I think the really important point there is asking the question above all, is capitalism serving us well today, right? So if we want to I think you did a really great job setting the scene, talking about some of the things that we kind of believe. I also want to talk a little bit about, whether we think that capitalism is evil. I personally don't think that capitalism is inherently evil. I think that it has been running unchecked for a very long time. And I think that it's doing a lot of harm, and I think it's doing a lot of damage. I think that we can feel dual ways about ideas and about concepts and about systems, where it can be something that has merit, it has goodness to it. I mean, if we didn't believe in capitalism to some degree, then Del and I wouldn't be doing the work that we do and have been doing, which is by and large helping people start businesses. It fuels a lot of what drives us and how we spend our time and our purpose. Because for people of color, it has been a sort of a pathway to liberation, to economic security, to safety in some ways. Because having a business allows you to gain money, it allows you to gain some power, it allows you to gain some agency over yourself, and I think that for that, we should all be, betting on capitalism in those ways. But I think we have to talk about where does it start to really broach into this moral territory that is just really, really bad for almost everybody involved.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's several different layers. There's to me the historical precedent of since slavery is the United States' first sin. So many folks have been the capital, right? And their work has been the thing that fuels capitalism.
Yes.
And we have not reconciled that. And in an absence of actually reconciling that and saying, what does that mean for us being in the United States, and as a result, the world, because the United States as a semi-colonial power, has reverberations all over Latin America and other places. Us not reconciling that is affecting all of us, regardless of who you are. So let's
be crystal clear on what we're talking about when we say this. I'm we don't need to sugarcoat here. If you're asking me, I think we're talking about slavery. I think, right? When we think about, and we're just talking about the United States here for a moment, right? Because there's ways I feel we could trace even farther back in history in a lot of ways. But if we're just looking at America's special brand of capitalism and how that is very much tied to racism, slavery, white supremacy,
Yep.
bigotry, prejudice. Like, we're going to dive into some of that in this discussion. I don't know how it's avoidable.
Yeah.
But to put it like really crystal clear, like,
Yeah.
like my people, right? Like, we were wealth at one point in time in this country. When we think about
and still are. I mean,
Yes.
when you look at like
Yes.
that study that came out about how HBCU graduates not only pay more for their student loans, but actually the actual institutions are charged more for those student loans. Like this extractive economy still exists for Black folks. Like people are paying higher interest rates and are being required to have more. So it's those things are not divorced from each other, right? I think like the 1619 Project, which we're big fans of, shows you very clearly how these things are tied together, and you cannot divorce yourself of it. Like for a long time, I used to say I'm a Dutch capitalist, because part of Dutch capitalism, or where capitalism started, was this idea that if you were going to make money as a Christian, because it was against Christianity to make money, like that was, if you were Christian, you were not supposed to charge interest.
Yeah.
Like that was what made Christians different from Jews, that made them like that was part of the anti-Semitic movement that happened in Europe at a certain point. Like I used to say I'm a Dutch capitalist, because Dutch capitalists said, if we're going to make money, you have to be socially responsible. You have to make a commitment socially towards something that's either in your town, your church, a group of people. You have to invest in that. So you can make money as you want, but you have to have a social enactment. The reason I stopped calling myself that is because, you know, in further readings and further education of myself, I realized like the Dutch also were the ones that led
I was
slavery
gonna say,
as
like,
a thing,
weren't they
right?
kind of like the main
exactly
engine behind the whole Middle Passage industry?
Exactly. So that's the thing, is like they managed to convince themselves, as long as we are doing social good and we have societies and associations that we've created, like nonprofits, as you think about them today, like there's a kernel of that came from Dutch capitalism. Saying, we're going to create associations in which if someone needs help, we're going to provide that help, right? And that is part of our responsibility. But I think that was also a way of them trying to wash away the stink from slavery.
Right.
Like, you can't divorce those things. So I no longer call myself that because I realized that would be a terrible thing to call myself. But I also think like there is something about that, about like if you've been the capital, if your work has been the capital and still continues to be the capital, your relationship to capitalism, therefore, is a very difficult one. And one of the things that my mom always says is that this country teaches you to be a consumer, not a capitalist.
What does she mean by that?
So the thing that she means by that is this is a country that teaches you how to buy. It teaches you to...
Sorry, I'm going to fix your mic too, by the way, just to make sure it's
okay. It's a thing that teaches you how to, like, buying things is a part of culture here. I had a cousin that came from Colombia, and she was surprised at how many cultural events or cultural, mind you, it was Christmas too.
Yeah.
Like how much of the culture around Christmas was about buying things, not being with each other. So it was about going to the store or getting the sale or looking for the coupon or engaging with people in selling, right? It wasn't about getting together with family and friends and community. It was about how do you buy a thing. Teaching people to be capitalists would be actually having simple business classes at a high school level, right? Like that does not exist in the United States, right?
Yeah, so, I mean, like I think about the education, I'm like, if we want to call it that, that we give kids today, I'm like, we don't even teach kids how to like manage a budget. I mean, in most schools, right? Like I think that this is literally like the 101 of like how to make it in life, is making sure you know how to manage the money that's coming in and the money that's going out, because our lives depend on it, right? And sorry, there's a thing I want to go on, but I want to let you finish that thought.
No, and so just to piggyback on around like the idea of being a consumer, not a capitalist, is like you're not taught to build your own business. You're not taught how to manage people. You're not taught how to sell a thing or make a thing to sell a thing. And that's so often when you were saying like the reason we believe that making businesses is an outlet for being able to create something is that so often we are also not allowed to have certain jobs. Like when my parents first moved here, it was not unusual for it, like it was the norm in a newspaper that would say white only. And my mom would be like, I can't apply for that job.
Yeah.
She was shocked when, she hadn't been to New York in 20 years and we went to New York in the mid 90s, and she saw all these nannies of color, because she used to say to me, I couldn't be a nanny because only white women could be nannies. And here's all these nannies of color. That could have been a job for me because I would have been able to earn more than working at a factory. Like factory work was the only thing that was available.
And like even
regardless of education, regardless of like any other thing, like jobs were racially segregated, and in so many ways still are racially segregated.
Absolutely. I think like even when you think back to times of slavery, like the things that we know, where certain like Black people were in the home doing the domestic work and they needed to look a certain way than the people who were out in the fields. Like the ones who had lighter skin were the house niggas, and the one that were outside, sorry, those were niggers, not niggas, which like we'll have a whole dissertation.
That's
we
a
can
whole
talk about
different conversation.
using the
I'm not
N-word.
gonna be here for it.
But no, for real, because I'm just thinking about that too. And like, I know this is even like a slight tangent, but I think anyone who's watching can see that you have fair skin, but like somehow no one's mistaken you for a white woman yet, I'm guessing.
God, no. So true. Nobody's ever said that. I'm racially ambiguous, but that ambiguity doesn't make people feel comfortable. Like that's just the reality. So white people aren't necessarily comfortable in front of me on a given thing. Like that's just not possible.
Yeah. Do you think that that's played a role in what jobs you've been able to have and not have?
Oh, definitely. I think with like all the when the first studies came out about people who had certain names were not able to get interviews, I was like, oh, this explains a lot, because my name is Deldelp Medina. So it is a racially ambiguous name. It is a genderless name. People don't know what to do with that name. And therefore, I know, like I remember at one point when I was just getting out of college and I was doing all the interviews and sending out resumes, people were giving me all these tips and tricks and things to do, but nobody mentioned my name as being an issue. And so often I think that it was an issue. I wasn't getting callbacks, or the phone, or the calls that I was getting is because somebody recommended me, and therefore somebody was willing to put their social capital out there and be able to say, yes, she deserves at least an interview, right? But I think it doesn't necessarily make people feel comfortable. And by say people, it's like literally anybody, because it's not a Latino name. Medina is an Arabic name, and while there are Latinx folks that have Medina, so a lot of people would be like, are you Muslim? Are you Indian? Where are you from? Like, are you Filipina? Like,
I was gonna say, there are Asian,
Southeast
Asian people with that last name too.
So many, I could represent a whole bunch of different kinds of folks. And as a result of that, sometimes people feel kinship towards me, which is great. And some people literally do not know what box to put me into. And when they don't know what box to put me into, like the reactions could be wildly different. None of them necessarily positive.
All right, so I want to go back to what we were talking. So we were talking about like there's so much of what we've learned to be consumers, not necessarily capitalists. So if we even think about that, like again, if we want to like go back to the roots of this country, I think it's really easy for us. We can go easily for an hour talking about what that looks like as a person of color and what your experience is going through this world and your relationship to capitalism, your relationship to money when you're in that position. But I also think about it, from the side of whiteness. And like, clearly I am not a white person, but I know white people. I have lots of white friends, and I interact with white people on a daily basis. And I think, and I read, right? And so I feel like I seem to be coming to a conclusion that a lot of white people are feeling some similar pains to what people of color and marginalized people, because it's not even just, because like honestly, when we think back to when slavery was a thing, there were definitely poor white people
and indentured
then
servants
too, right? Like they were, yes, exactly. Like that was a thing. I think like if anything, there might have been a different kind of experience that they felt when it comes to marginalization in that context, like where literally there is no entry point for you into the market to get a job. And if you want to make it and live, you have to work. Like, so I think that like it's not even like, I think that it's really easy for us to draw divisive lines along gender, around race when we're talking about capitalism. But I do think that there's a tyranny to it that affects everyone, even the people who have all of the resources, which I want to get into that too. So, okay, I want to like come back to this, but like, I think that one of the things I want to say is that like, I really believe that part of the problem, like the part of the root of the issue and what we're experiencing and what makes it so difficult to think about and deal with, like the idea of capitalism, why it feels so demonized today, or why we're always saying like it's an evil thing, is because our survival depends on it. Right? Like that there are too many things that, I mean, actually virtually everything you need money to have. And in as much as that relationship comes into play with the things that we need that ensure our like functional bodies can stay healthy and alive and moving around and operational, like all that shit costs money.
Yeah.
And like the only way you can get that is by working. And then we've also kind of created this like trap where, you know, it's very hard for some people to get jobs, or like we are actively innovating like a whole industry's jobs away and not giving them something else. And we also have these values and beliefs that are very tied to like the dignity of work. And if you're not working, then like you also inherently lack value. If you don't have very much money, then like you inherently lack value. And I think that we really have to start to shift that so that we can really recognize and understand that like your hands, your body, your spirit, your minds, like is also important, right? Like that when I think, okay, so here's an example. When we were making tinsel in China, I think about, you know, manufacturing a product in China, which is a whole conversation unto itself, but like that the people's hands who were assembling the products, like their hands were no more important than my hands. Like thinking about it from that lens, right? Like, and what would I want the conditions to be like if I was working in a factory assembling some American people's fucking random tchotchkes, you know what I mean? So like, I don't know, I just feel like there is a whole conversation about value that also has to be coupled with that, with dignity, in addition to like opportunity and money and all of that stuff too. So anyway,
and no, I agree with you. And I think like this is part of like going back to what kind of capitalistic society do we want? Like, or is capitalism the thing? Like I'm not, like, once again, let's keep this conversation going beyond the stream. Like I'm in kind of like an either or camp at this moment in time, because as much as I know that I'm tied to this moment in time and I have to think about my well-being, my body, my livelihood, my kid, you know, like all of those things being true. At the same time, I really have to question a whole bunch of things in which your well-being is not the ultimate thing. Profit is the ultimate thing that everybody's searching for. And I think that that's part of what's the difficulty that we're having in this moment in time, is that this planet could live on without us. Like this planet will morph into something else. We keep on polluting it.
It will. It has before and it will again.
Exactly. We as a species will die out. You know, like we will be somebody's like whatever species.
Archaeological fossils.
It'll be like, oh, this is really interesting. There were these monkey-like creatures that were like running around the earth and doing things. And, you know what I mean? Like they will find some sort of thing so that. But we can't live without this planet. And in extractive capitalism, as we have it right now, everything's for sale. The air's for sale. The water's for sale. Like our well-being is for sale. Profit is the only motive and answer for everything. And that's what's difficult to reconcile. So it's not, can I make something and sell it for twice as much and make a living? That's not the thing that it has become. It's everything is for sale, including people's well-being.
Yeah.
And so when you're talking about how, you know, I remember like the first era of robotics, the whole way that they sold the first era of robotics to the car manufacturers was saying, you'll have lower workers' comps and people won't break their backs lifting cars. Imagine if if a robot can lift a car rather than 5 guys, or 5 guys with a crank, or 5 guys with some sort of mechanism, piston mechanism.
Yeah.
But sometimes those things give out and people end up with a crushed leg, right? Like imagine having a robot that's going to be able to work with a human being hand in hand.
Yeah.
And it was like, that's the way it was sold. But actually what it has become is that those, working class jobs have disappeared and no longer
because
exist.
they've been automated out.
Because they've been automated out, because those robots can come in what those 5 guys used to do, and they weren't thinking about those 5 guys. They weren't like, okay, maybe we'll have them be the robot operators, or maybe we'll have them become like the technicians on it and repair the robots. It was, let's lay off all these people. Let's get rid of all these people. And so you have the situation you have in the United States where you have towns that were wealthy at some point and had access to capital at some point and were burgeoning at some point, and that no longer exists. And so that's the part that's difficult, because those folks' well-being was not built into the system of building the robot.
Absolutely. Michelle is saying, period, we won't be here. Like, I'm with you on that. Like, it's so...
Michelle, I'm not going to say you're wrong.
It's so true. It's so true. And like, I think that the other thing too, and like, I don't know, I want to say something crazy right now, which is that we have to change our relationship, like how we think about our relationship, not only to money, but to work.
Yeah.
I think that there's so much that's wrapped up into that, in terms of someone being perceived as worthy of existing, of having basic things. And I feel like if you were born and you're alive, you're fucking worthy. There's not like some group of chosen people and some group of not chosen people. Like, some people have had better advantages and have some better tools under their belts. Like the fact that we can sit here and have this fucking web discussion with you right now, like, speaks to a certain amount of like privilege and advantages that we have had.
Definitely.
But that's not to say that someone who is like out on the street begging for, their dinner right now isn't equally as smart, isn't equally as capable, isn't equally as worthy. Like, that is kind of like the thing that I feel like it always comes back to this idea. It's this very conservative idea, which is that like there is this group of people that are like not bound by the rules in the way that everyone else has to be bound by the rules, right? Like, it only works when everyone is fucking bound by the rules, and that everyone is understood to have an equal measure of value. And I feel like we have such a hard time grappling with that. Like, I think self-interest and greed like makes it really, really difficult. But I do think that like there's a way that we could think about realigning incentives so that people's interest becomes to try to contribute to the common good, and that there's an incentive to actually care about other people beyond yourself or beyond that immediate circle of where we are. Because the reality of it is like our survival, and however long, if we want to try to extend how long we as a species are going to live, I believe that we have to realize that we're all connected, and we have to do more for each other. We have to make decisions sometimes that go beyond our own self-interest. Like, we need to understand and recognize what those self-interests are, and also sometimes forego the thing that we want, because we realize that like the extension of that, like we go farther as a whole when we're thinking about other people and what they need.
And I mean, I think that I'm gonna get to what you just said, but I'm gonna add something that I've been thinking a lot about, which is that the way you have trust is vulnerability. When you're vulnerable with somebody, it's like that helps to build trust. But this is not a system nor a society that allows us to be vulnerable, right? So if you have a medical leave for whatever reason, if your family member has medical leave and you need to go and help them with that, that vulnerability is not baked into any of our systems. And so you can't have a sense of trust.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the issue that we're having right now, which is like people don't trust their bosses, and their bosses don't trust the companies, and the companies don't trust their employees, and banks don't trust the people they're lending to, and the people they're lending to don't trust the banks. Like, we don't trust politicians, and politicians don't trust us. Like, there's a lack of trust all around, but part of it deals with the lack of vulnerability that we all cannot exhibit in the current system.
Yeah.
So then when you're talking about like the moral imperatives of like how are we valued as human beings, part of it is that we're currently not allowed to be vulnerable. So that person that is on the corner asking for food, and we live in San Francisco, there's a huge homelessness problem. Like those people not only have worth, but some of them have jobs. Like there was a study that happened here in San Francisco. A lot of folks that are on the streets, it's not because they don't have a job. It's because they cannot afford housing, right? And the way that the system is currently built, it's not built to be able to create housing for people at every level. That's just the reality that we live in. And that's what makes it difficult.
Yeah.
So it's like that person's inherent worth is based upon a capitalistic idea that if they don't make enough, they're not worthy to live in this city.
Yeah, that somehow that's their own fault. Like,
Yes.
you're so lazy. Oh, so, okay, I want to, like, to the people who are watching, I'm really interested to know, because I'm going to, like, read off a list of things that I have here that I feel like should be rights. Things that I think that, like, just, you know, your existence, if you're here on this planet and we are taking care of each other, these are the things you're entitled to. I would love to see you guys drop into the chat what other things you're thinking of. So I have, like, to your point about homeless, a safe place to live, rest, and sleep, clean air, clean water, and healthy food, good health care, an honest and useful education, keyword useful, a livable wage or resources to satisfy other essential needs. So, like, you know, if you need money to go and buy toothpaste, that you have the wages that will allow you to go and buy toothpaste and toilet paper and those things and whatever. And an equal vote, right? Like an equal say in how these decisions get made. Yeah. Like, I'm very interested to know what other people think. I see Michelle saying food, clean water, housing, and healthcare. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And to take it back to the other thing that you were saying about, you know, vulnerability, I think, like, the systems that we have around us, they weren't designed with human nature in mind at all. Like, in general, I think that, you know, it in a way where I think it's been, like, I think about government in general, like our government, it's like very, like, I don't know, aspirational. Of, like, I don't know, some pinnacle behavior of some person that, like, has literally no, like, I don't know, actual characteristics of what a real person is, because, like, there's, like, temperance all over the place and, like, a lot of prayer and God trusting and, like, all this other, like, stuff. But I feel like, you know, at the end of the day, like, we are animals.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I cannot state this clearly enough. We are fucking animals. Like, at the end of the day, like, I think that, like, we have, like, allowed our understanding of what we're capable of, like, the fact that we can make the impossible possible into something that has got us thinking that we have gone so far beyond, like, the constraints that we always have and will have, and, like, this, as in as much as we need to get out of a really sticky spot of surviving, like, we won't out evolve this, right? Which is, like, we are, like, physiological, biologically made of matter, of, like, cells and, you know, like, all those things. There are organs and hormones, and, like, when you think about, you know, neurological synapses and all of that shit, like, and I'm like, we know enough about the human body to understand what some of those limits are and, like, what some of those downsides are. Like, I was using this example with someone the other day, and I was basically saying, like, you know, like, if we think about the fact that we're animals, I'm just like, you can't control away, like, all of the things that you know you're supposed to do, right? Like, we're all capable of good and bad. It depends on what the situation demands, because at the end of the day, we're all trying to survive. I think, like, you know, or, like, the example that I gave her, what I asked her, because she's married, and I was just like, you know, do you get in fights with your husband? And she was like, yes, of course. And I'm like, do you like having fights with your husband? No. I'm like, if you could, like, would you stop having fights with your husband? And I'm like, she's like, yeah, of course. And I'm like, okay, how would you do that? Like, what would you do that would, like, somehow prevent, like, that moment when you guys are having fight? Like, what it all boiled down to was me trying to make the point that I'm like, there is no part of you that doesn't have whatever the physiological reaction is that you're having when you guys are in a fight, like the things that your mind is doing that makes you react in that way. Like we're all that way. We're all built that same way, but our systems do not recognize that. And I think that that's the place where we start to see something like capitalism go off the rails. Like when we are incentivizing people to just get and grab as much money as possible, because if you want those like safe place to live, the clean water, the home, the all of that stuff, the essentials, you need to have money for that. If you need to have money, you have to work. And then if you have to work, like then it just puts people in this place of like, you know, what thing, like if you're very lucky and somehow you like live a wholly pure life and do some work that somehow does no harm to someone anywhere, that's great. But I think that there's a lot of depravity that comes out of that, a lot of desperation that leads to people doing lots of things. And that's where we get into this place where we're like, there are definitely things, like everything's for sale, and there are definitely things that are being bought and sold that should not be bought and sold.
And I think like when you're talking, like I want to ask you a question because I want to make sure I understand and everybody else understands. It's like when you're talking about morality, what does that mean for you, and how does that interplay into what you're talking about buying and selling?
When I talk about, sorry, say that again.
Morality.
I was looking at what Ben said, which I want to just surface this right, because we were talking about rights. So he's saying internet data privacy rights.
Oh, data privacy.
And he says, personally, I think one of the fundamental flaws in Western society is the obsession with individualism. Hell yeah. And especially in the USA. And then he put in parentheses, religious-driven exceptionalism, which is also very, very true. And I think that the fervor behind that is pretty wild too, where I'm like, maybe we can like bridge into like how religion plays a role in this too.
No, but
go
no,
ahead.
like, let's talk about the question about morality, which is like, how do you define morality? Because you've mentioned morality now several times.
Yes.
And how does that relate to capitalism? And how are those things intertwined? I think so often morality people equate also with religion. And some people can't decouple those things. Like there's for me, there's a moral code, and that moral code can and sometimes doesn't align itself with religious codes.
I think that that's a fair question. So I believe that people's religion often does shape their moral code. I think that, you know, I look at it from the very, 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 very like basic parts of ourselves as values. Like, and I'm gonna like try to not over explain what I mean by this, but like if you think about when we're first born, right? And we are like, you know, like if we're, I'm going to give a poor engineering analogy here because I'm not an engineer, but I'm just thinking like if you are like literally when you first are born, like you're just maybe one or two lines of code. Do you know what I mean? And then like you're becoming this more complex like program as you get older, right? Like your needs are so simple when you're first born. You need to eat, you need to shit, you need to sleep. Like someone is always taking care of that for you. All you have to do is cry, and then the thing comes, and then you go back to your peaceful state of like baby nirvana. But like as you kind of get older, then people start to shape your behaviors. Usually we're talking about your caregivers, right? So like if somebody is shaping your behavior, they're telling you this is right, this is wrong, right? Like I have a toddler, I have to do this stuff with her all the time. No, you cannot like draw markers on the wall. That is wrong. Like what morally decides that is a wrong thing versus a right thing? Like why can you draw on the wall and like or why can you draw on the paper and not on the wall? That type of thing. So I think like there are these things that are values, and those I think are like just these like really base lines of the program that is you and how you operate. And I think that those things have been ingrained in you from like toddlerdom, right? Like I think that that's even a part of how we end up with these struggles with ourselves as well. Like I think that our caregivers kind of, they like rightfully so, force us to repress parts of ourselves because again, that's about survival, right? Like if the example I like to use with that, I'm going to come around to the point, but I'm like, it's like, you know, you can't run around like naked. I can't just walk down the street and have it be socially acceptable to just wear no clothes on any given day. Like, so even if I naturally love just being in the flesh and naked, like I know that I have to cover parts of myself up, or people will like, I will be cast out from the herd. I will be killed. Something bad will happen, right? And so like, it's the caregiver's responsibility to be like, this is not okay. And like those become ingrained in like our values, right? What we think is okay and what we think is not okay. So if we're like looking at that, I feel like, so we all have that kind of baseline sort of system of values. I think that there's a lot of values that overlap, because I think they tie into just like some of the more primal parts of ourselves. But then I think there's places where those values start to diverge and those beliefs start to diverge. I also think that we bring those values, those beliefs into obviously how we interact every day in life, but obviously also into how we construct the systems of capitalism, right? And like who they are serving and how we are thinking about rewards and costs in that system are all going to tie back to a system of values that I think like are going to go back to its core creators. And I think that all the stories that we can find when we look at the evidence of history is that usually these were people who were very self-interested people, and that they were really just thinking about themselves and not about like how do we benefit the whole. So to answer your question about morality, like how do we think about that? I think that morality is also something that is very like shaped by culture, right? And I think that there are a lot of things that were okay even, 10, 20 years ago that are not okay today. Like we talk about cancel culture on the internet all the time because like, people do be fucking up, but then sometimes people are like, oh, are we overreacting? And so it's like, there's this question about where is that moral line? I think it's something that moves over time, it shifts. And I think that again, it's defined by like this aggregate set of values. But I think that like part of that is in the behaviors of a tribe and a larger culture and a larger society. And like, what are the things that we condone and what are the things that we don't? So we, I think, all feel a lot of dissonance when we watch the things that are happening right now in the White House with Donald Trump, for example. I think that a lot of these things go ever and like it doesn't affect people. It affects a lot of people in really, really bad ways. And we know that that is morally compromised, right? And so I think like the aggregate of like an understanding, this is why I also think like discourse is so important, because it is that discussion that happens from groups of people that starts to define where the moral line is and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And that is how I think we start to actually define a world where we have more considerate capitalism, is one where we are having discussions and we are deciding what is okay and what is not. And when we are like hitting these inflection points where we're like, oh, well, here's a new innovation that we're like thinking about making robots that can stab people. And then we're like, maybe we should have a conversation about that. Like, is that really the thing that we need to be doing and buying and selling? Or like, maybe not. Like, and so.
Yeah, but then you see, but so often people will then go like, it's not the robot's fault. Stabbing is the thing that's bad. Not putting together the two things, right? So often people like disassociate those things and go like, but the robot, it's not the robot's fault that it was programmed like that, but then they'll still sell the stabbing robot, right? Like, and some people will still buy the stabbing robot.
And some people will fucking buy the stabbing robot.
Exactly. Rather than before the stabbing robot is even conceived of as an idea, there is a group of people that have a sense of morality and saying, is this really the thing that we want to build?
Yeah,
you can build anything. Like the reality is like today in extractive capitalism, without enough money, you can hire the best people to do a thing. You can engage in that thing and you can put it out there and somebody will buy it.
Yes.
But the question should be, is that really, like to me, like that's that kind of like tripwire. Like anybody who's like listening to this that has a lot of money should be thinking, is that the thing that I really want to invest my time and energy in?
Well, I wouldn't even frame it that way. I would frame it like, I don't know, like what purpose does it serve?
Yeah.
Because in so many places, I think that this goes back to, if it's not about greed, it's about ego.
Yeah.
And there's so many things there. Oh, that reminds me of a conversation that we had recently where you were talking about, oh my God, what were you talking about? You were talking about people who had like had successful exits and wanted to get back in the game and start another company and like do it again. And you were like, we were talking about like it falling into a few different categories, right?
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember what that was?
Yeah, you wrote it down though, because we were talking, we have these conversations on the regular. But
like it was like ego.
Yeah.
Like, one was like adventure.
Yeah.
One was sport.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's different, like when you've accumulated a certain amount of wealth already and you've had a certain amount of success within the current system, the reason you want to get back into it is, you know, it's usually like within certain categories. It's definitely like to prove to yourself that you can do it again, because you think of it as a competitive sport and you're a competitive person, and this is the way that you know how to engage in the world. You don't know how to like relax and enjoy. And then the other thing is like some people completely check out and it's all about their own pleasure, and it's all about their own like wanting to engage. So it's like the person that buys the yacht, that buys the 5 houses, that travels the world in a private jet, that suddenly is just living a very bacchanalian kind of life because that is the only thing that they can think of doing with all their money. And so the question then becomes to me is like, why are you hoarding so much money? Like that to me is like a question that I have in this current system. There's a lot of people hoarding a lot of money, and it's not, they're not doing anything with it. Right? Like it's
I mean, not only that, but there are people who are making money so quickly that they can't possibly spend it. Like there's when we get to Bill Gatesian,
not even within 3 generations,
Elon Muskian levels of wealth, it's like they can't even spend all that goddamn money. Like
not even in 4 generations, and we don't even know if we have 4 generations left on this earth. That's the other question.
Also, why it kills me when like I'm on Twitter and people are like really standing for like the rights of like people to become these like extraordinary billionaires, and I'm just like, who are like are what purpose does it serve for you to like defend this? Like what are you getting out of this, right? Like I have so many questions, but I want to read Steven's comment.
Okay.
So we can't forget that capitalism has a memory, in parentheses, generational wealth. Any pivot in the current state of things must account for this. In America, that means we must find a place of reconciliation, he's put that in quotes, with African Americans, reparations. We can't go and just say, all right, going forward, everything is on an equal plane, and disregard the fact that much of white American wealth has built at a time when black people were literally on the balance sheets, which definitely touches back on what you said earlier. And Ben, thank you for chiming in too. To Stephen's point, the systems of ethics that trickle out of capitalism informs individual views of morality. Systematically speaking, we haven't done a great job of defining ethics that inform non-harmful morals because everything is designed to drive personal wealth and success. Too long didn't read. U.S. ethics are fuck you, got mine. This is so fucking true.
Wow. Thank you to Stephen and Ben.
Yes, thank you, Stephen and Ben. I'm like, I agree. And in fact, like this is a thing that, that Marco and I kind of talk about too. And we were talking about it in the context of like public safety, right? And all the conversations about like the prison industrial complex and how, there are people who have this desire, like they want to be safe, right? Like, I mean, everybody wants to be safe. We want to be safe too. But there's also, it's like this idea that's coupled with like, I want to be safe and also like, fuck you, I got mine, right? Where it's like, I'm good, like figure it out, fend for yourself, and like also keep me safe. Like I also want to be insulated, and I'm just like, you can't have both of those things. Like as long as the thing that you're doing is like a very much a fuck you got mine, and you are not holding responsibility for your fellow like man or woman or human, non-binary person, then like you are also part of the problem. Like you will never be safe until we are all safe.
No, that's great. Can I go back to, I can't remember Stephen or Ben that said this about like
on the balance sheets.
Not only on the balance sheets, but historically there have been communities that have created wealth, and then that wealth has quickly evaporated because of an economic system that's not built for us, right? Like that's part of it. So, if you look at Reconstruction, like people were very wealthy. I just recently got this little kid's book about Madam C.J. Walker, and she was a very wealthy woman. She actually created hair care as an industry before anybody else. Forget about like anybody's hair. Like she created this idea that hair care was a thing. She made a lot of money, and it quickly evaporated and was taken away in several different ways. So like that's the thing, is like I think about the last downturn where I had some family members lose their houses, and as a result of that, when they lost their houses, that also has meant that they've lost their retirement, and so now they're in their 60s and their 70s, and because they lost their houses, they don't have the wealth that they worked for so long, because they got into a bad loan and one thing led to another, and next thing you know, they have nothing. And we cannot discount that a lot of us that are currently in this moment in time, the reason why we're also eyeing capitalism with a skeptical eye, like why we're like, is this really the thing? And I think like when you hear this whole idea that millennials are interested in socialism, why they're interested, it's baffling to me how like pundits will be like, why are young people interested in socialism? I'm like, did you not see this last downturn?
Yeah, right.
Did you not experience this last downturn?
Well, not even that, but like, look what you have handed millennials and Gen Z. Like, we have
exactly. Have you
no retirement hopes? We have no property. We have
all of that.
Ungodly amounts of debt. Like, the planet is fucked. Like, there's like,
and
I'm just like,
why are people attracted to socialism? And the reason I'm bringing up socialism, and we can even like touch on communism, is that going back to this original point that you talked about, morality, is like, one, I view capitalism askance, and I'm questioning it, but I also want to just like, in a perfect world, communism should have worked. In a perfect world, socialism should work. But so often, any system that we humans, us animals, create has issues.
It becomes corrupted.
It becomes corrupt because of who we are inherently as beings, right?
Thank you.
And so
but we also are not, I feel like we have not yet, at least I haven't seen it. I want to see it. Maybe our friends in like Scandinavia are starting to break through, I don't know. But like, I want to see these systems designed with the nature of humans in mind.
Yeah. So we've created systems to try to control nature. We've created systems to control things that are external to us. We have not created systems that are actually about our own internal world.
Exactly.
And that is the huge gap that we have right now.
It is that we
So while I'm like,
animals.
Get your business, sell a thing, make a thing really well, like, how can I help you do that? Like, while I'm all about that, I'm also really conscious that none of those things can happen unless somebody's interior world is really good. And that part of what stops human beings from getting to a place is not just the systems that we create, but also are the beliefs that we have internally about ourselves and the beliefs that we have about the world. And those things are intertwined, and it's messy, and it's not pretty, and it does involve a series of historical things that we've inherited and things that we also are trying to disinherit. Like, I love my family dearly, but there are certain things about them that I will, like, I'm just not going to follow in certain people's footsteps. I don't think it's a healthy thing to do.
Yeah.
And so often people say, like, oh, my culture's not like this, or my culture's not like that. And I've often said, like, culture is not a fixed point. It is not a monument. It is not a piece in the museum. Culture is a living, breathing thing that's constantly changing, and that is our greatest opportunity. So that if we are going to be thinking about systems and things, let us think about those things of how they can serve us as human beings. And when I say us, it's all of us, right? Not just how do we use these things to serve ourselves.
Yes.
Like as an individual, like we have to be thinking in a more communal way, because the reality is, like, I could give up buying things in plastic bottles for the rest of my life until I die. It is not going to solve the issue of all the plastic that is in the ocean. That is a huger conversation that someone on a board that makes plastics needs to be resolving. How are they going to shut that company down? That's what they should be thinking about. But so often that's not what they're thinking about. They're thinking about the fact that they have a board seat on a company that's probably a multi-billion-dollar company, and how do they get those margins to be better? And that's what is current capitalism at the way it's being practiced. And so it's not just
profits over people.
Profits over people. And we are not, like, it's not that individual going like, what's going to happen to me? What's my safety going to be? What is my kids' and grandkids' safety going to be? They're not thinking about those things. They're thinking in that individual moment of like, how do I make profits go better? Like go higher? Like that, how do I get that 30% bump so that I get a 30% bump?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is a whole conversation too about like, how do you live and work in that system and also actively try to change it. I'm looking at Cannon's comment where he said maybe we stop looking to Europe for leadership, which I think there is something to be said about like Western ideals and how those things have like permeated our culture as well. And when we look at indigenous cultures, like I think that there's a lot for us to learn there, where I think that is one of few cultures we can look at and see true sharing and mutualistic like values and ideals that might be worth emulating. So like I feel like what we've got with the last like 5 minutes, I would love to kind of just like, I mean, I like what does how can we think about divesting from harmful capitalistic practices, like when we are like dreaming and all of those good things, like where should we start?
I think the one thing that I want to make sure people don't do, so can I start with a don't before
Absolutely.
I do? Don't disassociate yourself from the reality that you're living in or the needs that you currently have. Like you should be doing something that kind of encompasses all the points that you talked about: safety, shelter, food, water, healthcare, those things. Like, do not decouple yourselves from that, because the moment you try to like negotiate that out for yourself and being, I don't want to participate in X, Y, and Z. I don't want to like get a home loan because I find that system to be abhorrent. The moment you do that, you're also putting yourself in danger. And the moment you're putting yourself in danger, you're no good to anybody. And I think so often when people take on work like this, they try to disassociate their own needs from the needs that they see from a broader community. And that just is not mentally healthy. It could lead you down a path that I've seen it. I've seen people do this. It's not a good idea. Like the person that's so anti-capitalistic that they end up living in their car.
Yeah.
And capitalism still exists, but they're the ones that are living in their car.
Yeah.
And their safety and their health is being compromised as a result of it.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody should be putting themselves on the line like that.
I agree. I mean, I think like, you know, this isn't to say that like all of self-interest is bad. I think that we have over-optimized for self-interest. And so again, it brings me back to the like, sometimes you have to make a decision that is not in your own personal self-interest, but is better for the whole. And I think about that in a lot of other contexts too, which, so I'm going to like read off, because I did a talk a couple weeks ago, Del, you were there, on, you know, the future of business and what capitalism that works for everyone could look like. And I came up with these 5 rules of considerate capitalism, which I'm going to rattle off right now. So the first one is fuck the status quo. Because seriously, fuck the status quo. The second one is reshape the role of markets. And that touches back on what we talked a little bit about with the morality, right? Like, we have to really think about ways to understand what are the things that should be bought and sold. And like, when we are evaluating that, just to wrap that thought up, is like, to think about it in the lens of like, does it corrupt the purpose and the value of that thing when you start to transact with that in a way of like it being something that's bought or sold, right? Like, does it actually lessen how effective it is? Does it make it inaccessible when we know that at a baseline it should be something that everyone has, when we start to commoditize that, right? The third thing is design with human nature in mind. As I said, we are all fucking animals, and we need to start designing our systems with that kind of framing. Otherwise, we are going to continue to disappoint ourselves.
Yeah. And harm ourselves.
Over and over and over again.
We're
Kill
harming
ourselves,
Yeah,
really.
we're harming ourselves.
Which brings me to number 4, which is seek to minimize harm to others, which I think, like, if we're talking about one thing that, like, can band everybody together, like, you know, the way that this one author puts it, like a meta-morality, like a deep pragmatism that like connects all of us, I think it should be like our compass to minimize harm to others. Like, if that is something that you are able to just even filter most of your business decisions through, is like understanding what you're creating or what you're working or like on or any of these things, like what harm is that doing to others? And that's not just physical harm, but mental harm, financial harm. I think about it exactly like extracting more than you are returning to the source that you have taken it from. I think we really have to start to think about business and capitalism in a regenerative lens. And then the last thing is figure out what part you're going to play. And so I feel like, Del, you gave some really great advice and how people should think about that. I would also add to that, you know, to think about it from what is your universe around you. Like, you could and should start with the communities that you are in and have meaningful access to, and making sure that your contributions to that community are valuable, and again, really bent towards minimizing harm, and that you're trying to mobilize that community to also try to attack some of these larger issues. And just like, you know, like they said in Frozen 2.
Which we're fans
watch
of.
a lot of Frozen.
We
I have a 4-year-old. But yeah, like do the next right thing. You know, the next right thing. So what other thoughts do you have to share on that?
I'm gonna say, like, I think iteration is important. Trying to be perfect is really not helpful. It's not helpful psychologically. It's not helpful sociologically. It's not helpful. So what's the next best thing you can do? And it could be as simple as saying, I'm not going to buy bottled water. In some places, you have no choice but to buy bottled water, because otherwise you do not have clean water, right? So everybody needs to make decisions for themselves. And those of us who don't have to buy bottled water because our water is clean should be working towards making sure that everybody has access to water.
Absolutely.
Right? So like the water wars, which were, the CIA did some paper about it 20 years ago that I happened to like find 20 years ago. And like that has stuck with me. Like water wars are a real thing that we're now starting to see the beginnings of. And perhaps we will not see the end of, because we're actually not actively saying the water must be clean for everybody. I think air is going to become like the next thing. You know, like we should be all having access to clean air, right?
Much. I'm like, I can't even engage with
but
that
what I'm saying is like
very
you
sad.
You have to make the choices that you can and take on the things that you can, and not let the rest of the complexity and the nuance of it all to overtake you, because that is also not helpful. Right? And so you have to choose the thing. Like I've chosen not to buy bottled water. Like that's my thing. I don't buy bottled water. I usually have a water container. I try not to buy things, like to bring a container along with me everywhere.
Like a single serve type of like
because it's
whatever.
just not worth it to me. Like it's not worth it to me. But that's just the choice I have made. You got to find your own choice in your own way of knowing fully well that the best thing you can do is organize and vote. If you are able to vote in any place in the world, do so. And if you're able to organize, do so. Like those are the two things. Like democracy as we know it, and it is deeply flawed, and it is hand in hand with current capitalistic structures. And I'm not going to discount or dismiss that, but I also know that it's one of the few things that you can do in which you can engage people, right? And it's not just vote, but then it's follow up with that vote. I've become that old lady.
You don't get to check out. Like that's the thing.
I don't think call my council person and be like, I found blah blah blah. You know what I mean? Like I'm the person that emails and says, I don't like how you voted on that thing. Like I've become that person. One, it makes me feel good, and two, it lets people know I'm holding you accountable.
I think we definitely have to like make it easier for people to interact with the civic machine. But you're totally right, and like unfortunately, we live in a time now where like we really just, I mean, when we're looking at the line of morality, like and how people are going to perceive what role you played in it, like opting out is a choice you can make, but you might find yourself like not on the right side of where you want to be on the moral line by just opting out, because you basically like help perpetuate a system by doing absolutely nothing. So really be thinking about what that role is. And speaking of your point, like I feel like I'm listening to this podcast. I love this podcast, Seen on Radio. And they're doing, this season is about the history of democracy in the United States. And it really, in this first 3 episodes, has gone through how those things are really intertwined. And I feel like this is something that we can take to Twitter and have a conversation about later. But I was going to say that, like, you know, the last episode that they talked about really, like, kind of posed this question about, you know, capitalism and democracy being at odds. Right? Like that if you have more democracy, does that mean you have less capitalism and vice versa? And if that's true, like which of those things is more important? So anyway, our time is up for the day. Yay. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We'll be back next Tuesday, same time, same place, with another friend, Ryan Triggs, and we're going to talk about success. How to define it and how to find it. Do you consider yourself to be successful, Del?
Some days yes and some days no.
Yeah. I think it's something that like most of the people I know who by other people's definitions would be considered successful struggle with the idea of calling themselves successful.
Yeah.
And I want to dig into that.
I'll be watching then.
Word. So yeah, we'll be talking about that next week. And thank you for joining us. You survived another episode of Everything She Knows. And definitely at Mitch and me, an Opera Queenie, and Deldelp, Deldelp on Twitter.
Yeah.
Feel free to let us know your thoughts, concerns, roses, onions, all that stuff.
And share. This will be up so you can share it with other folks. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Keep the conversation going.
Yes. We are out.
Bye.
And I just realized that I have to actually physically get up to